Brad Pitt proved that heroism transcends celebrity status. Witnesses watched in awe as the Hollywood heartthrob transformed from A-list actor to everyday hero. The flames were real, the danger imminent, and Brad's actions nothing short of extraordinary. As the scene unfolded, onlookers held their breath, watching the star they knew from the silver screen step into a role far more significant than any he had played before. But it was his final gesture that left everyone speechless. Are you ready to witness true heroism? The sun dipped low on the horizon as Brad Pitt's car glided down the empty stretch of asphalt. The fading light painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the quiet road. Brad's fingers tapped absently on the steering wheel, his mind wandering to the mundane tasks that awaited him at home. In one instant, the serene drive shattered into chaos. Brad's eyes widened as they locked onto a horrifying sight ahead. A car lay overturned on the side of the road, flames already licking at its twisted metal frame. The acrid stench of burning rubber filled his nostrils, snapping him back to the present moment. Brad's heart raced as he slammed on the brakes, tires screeching in protest. The car jerked to a halt, and for a moment Brad sat frozen, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Screams pierced the air, cutting through the low roar of the growing flames. Brad's hands shook as he fumbled with his seatbelt, adrenaline surging through his veins. He hesitated for a split second, but as another scream rang out, his jaw set with determination, and he threw open the car door. As Brad sprinted towards the inferno, the heat intensified with each step. The car was a mangled mess, its frame twisted beyond recognition. His heart nearly stopped when he spotted a small hand pressed against one of the back windows. A child was trapped inside. The realization hit Brad like a punch to the gut, spurring him into action with renewed urgency. Without hesitation, Brad wrapped his jacket around his hand and smashed it against the back window. On the third try, the window shattered, and he cleared away the remaining shards. A young girl's terrified face appeared in the opening. "It's okay," Brad called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here to help. Can you reach my hand?" The girl stretched her arm towards him, but she was still too far away. Brad realized with growing dread that she was pinned in place by her seatbelt. He would have to find another way in. Brad circled the vehicle, desperately searching for another point of entry. The driver's side door was closest to him, but it was also where the fire burned hottest. With all his strength, he wrenched at the door handle. It didn't budge. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but Brad pushed it down. He braced himself and pulled again, putting every ounce of strength he had into the effort. This time, he felt the door give slightly. The metal groaned in protest, but slowly, agonizingly, the door began to open. As soon as the gap was wide enough, Brad peered inside. The driver was slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. In the passenger seat, a woman was regaining consciousness, her movements slow and disoriented. "Can you hear me?" Brad shouted over the roar of the flames. "I'm going to get you out of here." The woman's eyes focused on Brad, confusion giving way to desperate hope. She nodded weakly, then gestured towards the back seat. "Our daughter," she managed to croak out. Brad's mind raced. He had to get them all out, and fast. The fire was spreading quickly now, and he could hear the distant wail of sirens. Help was on the way, but would it arrive in time? The heat hit Brad like a freight train as he approached the burning vehicle. Sweat instantly beaded on his forehead, trickling down his temples. The acrid smell of burning rubber and gasoline assaulted his senses, making his eyes water. For a moment he hesitated, the primal instinct for self-preservation battling with his determination to help. Brad circled the wreckage, his shoes crunching on shattered glass and twisted metal. The car groaned ominously, the frame warping under the intense heat. Through the smoke-streaked windows, he caught a glimpse of movement. A family trapped inside, their faces etched with terror. Time seemed to slow as their eyes met his, a silent plea for help that cut through the roar of the flames. Brad's mind raced, memories of action movie stunts flashing through his thoughts. But this was no carefully choreographed scene with safety measures in place. This was raw, terrifying reality. The heat seared his skin, a stark reminder that one wrong move could cost him his life. In that moment, something shifted within Brad. The fear and hesitation melted away, replaced by a laser-like focus. He spotted a chunk of debris nearby, possibly part of the car's bumper. Without hesitation, Brad snatched it up, ignoring the way it scorched his palms. He approached the driver's side window, locking eyes with the terrified man inside. With a nod of understanding between them, Brad swung the makeshift tool at the glass. The window shattered, raining down in a glittering cascade. Brad reached inside, his hand finding the driver's arm. He pulled with all his might, but the man was trapped, pinned by the crushed metal of the dashboard. The car groaned again, a sound that chilled Brad to his core despite the searing heat. Brad braced himself against the car's frame, ignoring the way the hot metal blistered his skin. With a roar that rivaled the flames themselves, Brad summoned strength he didn't know he possessed. The metal creaked and gave way. The driver slid free, and Brad half dragged, half carried him away from the wreckage. But there was no time to celebrate. 2 more lives hung in the balance, and the inferno was growing more ferocious by the second. Brad dove back towards the car. The passenger door was warped shut, but the window had already shattered from the heat. He reached inside, feeling for the woman's seatbelt. His fingers fumbled with the clasp, precious seconds ticking away. Finally, the belt released. Brad pulled the woman free, her limp form a dead weight in his arms. As he stumbled away from the car, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, a child's frightened whimper from the back seat. Time seemed to stand still. Brad knew the risks. The car could explode at any second, but the thought of leaving that child behind was unthinkable. With a silent prayer, he plunged back into the inferno one last time. The back seat was a maze of twisted metal and melting upholstery. Brad's eyes stung, tears streaming down his face as he searched for the child. His hand brushed against something soft, a small arm. He grasped it gently but firmly, guiding the terrified child towards him. As Brad emerged from the wreckage, cradling the child against his chest, a deafening boom shook the air. The force of the explosion knocked him off his feet, sending him tumbling to the ground. He curled his body around the child, shielding them from the rain of fiery debris. For a moment, all was silent, except for the crackle of flames and the pounding of Brad's own heart. Then, reality came rushing back. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Brad looked down at the child in his arms, then at the family he'd pulled from the wreckage. They were alive, battered, shocked, but alive. The sirens grew louder, but Brad knew the first responders were still minutes away. Time was running out, and he faced an impossible choice. Would he risk everything one last time, or had he already pushed his luck too far? Brad's hands trembled as he gripped the scorching door handle, the metal searing his skin. Inside, the family's panicked cries pierced through the crackling flames, spurring him to action. He pulled with all his might, muscles straining against the stubborn door, but it wouldn't budge. The heat intensified, flames licking closer to the trapped passengers with each passing second. Sweat poured down Brad's face, mixing with soot and grime. His designer clothes, now torn and blackened, clung to his body. The acrid smell of burning rubber and melting plastic filled his nostrils, making it hard to breathe. He could hear the terrified whimpers of the child inside, a sound that tore at his heart and steeled his resolve. As Brad struggled with the unyielding door, his mind raced. The family's fate rested solely in his hands. In that moment of desperation, a memory flashed through Brad's mind, a stunt from one of his action movies. It was risky, perhaps even foolish, but it might be their only chance. His eyes darted around, searching for anything that could help. Amidst the debris, a glint of metal caught his attention. A tire iron lay just a few feet away, partially hidden under some broken glass. Brad's heart leaped. This could be the key to their salvation. With renewed determination, Brad snatched up the tire iron. The weight of it in his hands felt reassuring, a tangible hope in the face of overwhelming odds. He positioned himself in front of the jammed door, feet planted firmly on the ground. The faces of his own children flashed before his eyes, fueling his resolve. Brad took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. With a primal yell that tore from deep within his chest, Brad swung the tire iron with all his might. The metal connected with the door's hinges with a resounding clang. Sparks flew as metal met metal, but the door held fast. Undeterred, Brad swung again and again, each impact reverberating through his arms. On the fourth swing, something gave way. A metallic groan pierced the air, like the death rattle of the collapsing structure. Hope surged through Brad's veins, giving him a second wind. He redoubled his efforts, swinging the tire iron with renewed vigor. Suddenly, with a final, ear-splitting screech, the door tore free from its frame. Without hesitation, Brad tossed the tire iron aside and reached into the smoke-filled interior. His lungs burned as he plunged into the inferno. Through the thick smoke, he could barely make out the huddled figures. With urgent movements, he unbuckled seatbelts and guided the family to safety. As the last child emerged from the wreckage, a deafening boom shook the air. The force of the explosion knocked Brad off his feet, sending him tumbling to the ground. He curled his body around the child, shielding them from the rain of debris and intense heat. For a moment, all was silent, except for the crackle of flames and the pounding of Brad's own heart. Then reality came rushing back. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Brad looked down at the child in his arms, then at the family he'd pulled from the wreckage. They were alive, battered, shocked, but alive. The car groaned, a sound that sent chills down Brad's spine. He knew time was running out. With a final surge of strength, he wrenched the door open, feeling the metal give way beneath his hands. Smoke billowed out, engulfing him in a choking cloud. Brad's eyes watered as he squinted into the darkness, desperately searching for signs of life. A small hand grasped his, and Brad's heart leapt. He pulled, gently but firmly, guiding a young girl from the wreckage. She coughed and sputtered, her face streaked with soot. Brad set her down carefully, his mind already racing back to the inferno. There were more lives at stake. Brad plunged back into the smoke-filled car. His lungs burned, every breath a struggle against the toxic fumes. The heat was overwhelming, but Brad pushed on, driven by a force he couldn't explain. His hands found fabric, then skin. The unconscious form of the father lay slumped across the center console. Brad's muscles screamed in protest as he lifted the man, inching backwards out of the vehicle. With a final heave, they tumbled out onto the asphalt. Brad gasped for air, his chest heaving. The night air felt blessedly cool against his skin, but there was no time to rest. A muffled cry reached his ears, barely audible over the crackling flames. Brad's blood ran cold. There was still someone inside. He turned back to face the burning wreck, knowing that every second counted. Brad's body ached, his lungs protesting every breath. He'd already pushed himself beyond his limits, but he knew he couldn't stop now. With a deep breath that seared his throat, he steeled himself for one final push. The heat hit him like a wall as he approached the car once more. Brad's skin prickled, the intense heat threatening to overwhelm him. But he pressed on, driven by a determination that surpassed fear or pain. He reached the rear door, the metal hot enough to blister his skin. Brad gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain as he searched for a way in. A faint whimper caught his attention, barely audible over the roar of the flames. Brad's heart raced. He was close, so close. Time seemed to slow as Brad worked, each second stretching into an eternity. The world narrowed to this single, crucial task. Nothing else mattered, not the approaching sirens, not the gathering crowd, not even his own safety. There was only the mission, the desperate need to save one more life. Finally, Brad's hands found what they sought. A small, trembling form huddled in the back seat, nearly hidden beneath a blanket of smoke and shadow. With infinite care, Brad reached in, gently lifting the child from the wreckage. As he emerged from the inferno for the last time, cradling the precious burden in his arms, Brad felt a wave of relief wash over him. The family was complete. Against all odds, he'd managed to save them all. The air around Brad shifted, a subtle change that sent a chill down his spine despite the searing heat. Something was wrong. The family was safe, huddled together on the grass nearby, but a nagging feeling tugged at Brad's gut. He turned back to the wreckage, his eyes scanning the twisted metal and flickering flames. That's when he heard it, a faint whimper, barely audible above the crackling fire. Brad's heart plummeted. There was someone else trapped inside. Without hesitation, he plunged back into the inferno. The smoke enveloped him like a suffocating shroud, thick and acrid, filling his lungs and stinging his eyes. He stumbled forward, hands outstretched, feeling his way through the darkness. The heat pressed against him, an oppressive force threatening to overwhelm his senses. Time seemed to slow as Brad inched deeper into the wreckage. The car groaned and creaked around him, a metallic death rattle that sent shivers down his spine. He knew he was racing against the clock. The fuel tank could ignite at any moment, turning this rescue into a tragedy. Brad's fingers brushed against something soft, fabric. He groped blindly, heart pounding as he searched for a sign of life. There, a small hand grasped his own, and Brad's world narrowed to that single point of contact. He pulled gently, carefully extracting a small figure from the twisted metal. As Brad emerged from the smoke-filled interior, cradling the child in his arms, he felt a tremor beneath his feet. The ground itself seemed to shudder, a warning of impending disaster. Brad's legs felt like lead, every step a monumental effort as he half-carried, half-dragged the young victim away from the wreck. His lungs screamed for clean air, each breath a ragged gasp. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision, but Brad refused to give in to exhaustion. Not now, not when they were so close to safety. He pushed his body to its absolute limit, muscles straining as he stumbled forward. The world behind them erupted. Heat slammed into Brad's back as the car exploded, the force of the blast knocking him off his feet. He tumbled to the ground, the child still clutched tightly to his chest. For a moment, all was chaos and confusion. Brad's ears rang, his vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his head as he took stock of their situation. Miraculously, they had made it. Brad and the child lay on the grass, mere feet away from where the burning wreckage now raged unchecked. As the adrenaline began to fade, Brad became acutely aware of the pain coursing through his body. His hands and arms were a mess of cuts and burns. His lungs felt raw and abused. But none of that mattered as he looked down at the small figure stirring in his arms. The child, a young boy, Brad now realized, opened his eyes, confusion and fear evident in his gaze. Brad managed a reassuring smile, his voice hoarse as he whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now." Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, and he threw his arms around Brad's neck, clinging tightly. The simple gesture of trust and gratitude threatened to overwhelm Brad. He held the child close, his own eyes stinging with more than just smoke. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Help was finally on the way. Brad looked over to where the rest of the family huddled together, their faces a mix of relief and disbelief as they took in the scene before them. The father, now conscious, locked eyes with Brad. No words were needed. The gratitude in that gaze said more than any words ever could. As the first responders arrived on the scene, Brad felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The full weight of what he had just accomplished began to sink in. He had risked everything, pushed himself beyond what he thought possible, and in doing so, had saved an entire family from certain death. As the chaos of the rescue subsided, Brad's body screamed for rest. But something in the young boy's eyes compelled him to make one final, unexpected gesture. Emergency vehicles flooded the scene, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow across the scorched earth. The rescued family huddled together on the grass, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Brad stood a few feet away, his chest heaving as he gulped in fresh air. The adrenaline that had fueled his heroic actions was fading, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion and the sharp sting of his injuries. His gaze settled on the young boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, sitting perfectly still. The child's small frame trembled, and Brad felt a shift within himself. Ignoring the burning pain that coursed through his body, he knelt down beside the child. Their eyes met, a flicker of recognition passing across the boy's face. The child's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Instead, his gaze locked onto Brad's, a silent connection forming between them. Brad's hands shook slightly as he reached for the zipper of his jacket. The once pristine leather was now covered in soot and grime. With gentle movements, he slipped the jacket from his shoulders and carefully draped it around the boy's small frame. "There you go, buddy," Brad said softly, his voice from the smoke. "That should keep you warm." As he zipped up the front, something small and metallic glinted in the flashing lights. Brad reached into the jacket's inner pocket and pulled out a simple silver chain with a small, well-worn medallion. "This," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is very special to me. It's been with me through some tough times, and I think you should have it now." The boy's eyes widened as Brad gently placed the chain around his neck. The medallion rested against his chest, a tangible reminder of the miracle that had just occurred. As paramedics rushed over, their equipment rattling, Brad's final act of kindness left everyone speechless. The EMTs paused, taking in the scene before them. A soot-covered Hollywood star kneeling beside a small boy wrapped in a too large leather jacket, a silver medallion gleaming against his chest. One of the paramedics approached, her voice gentle but urgent. "Sir, we need to check you for injuries. Can you come with me, please?" Brad nodded, slowly rising to his feet. He winced, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through his battered body. Before turning to follow the paramedic, he locked eyes with the boy one last time. Stay strong, kiddo, he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You've got a guardian angel looking out for you now. The boy's hand clutched the medallion, his eyes never leaving Brad as the star was led away to be examined. In that moment, the jacket and medallion became more than mere objects. They were symbols of hope, bridging the gap between a Hollywood icon and a young life forever changed by an act of unexpected kindness. As the sirens faded, Brad Pitt stood amid the chaos, his Hollywood glamour replaced by soot and singed clothing. He was simply a man who had risked everything for strangers. The rescued family huddled nearby, eyes filled with gratitude. Sarah, a local bystander, approached with tears. "You didn't even hesitate," she whispered. Brad's gaze drifted to the wreckage. "In that moment, we're all just human," he said softly. "Fame, money, none of it matters when a life is at stake." His words lingered, a reminder that true heroism lies in the choices we make during crisis. Brad's actions had rekindled belief in human compassion, challenging all to find the hero within themselves.